know when we open it up to the audience, I'll be sneaking over here and grabbing one of these mics just so we can catch what they're saying for the online Zoomers as well. So if you see me stirring up and taking your mic away, don't be panicked. Okay. Okay, great. Good luck with your mic.
Yeah, actually doing this now. So far, this is my favorite part. We should do it every night.
Just like, okay, everyone listen up.
Rebecca, we're just going to stop the screen share temporarily.
Oh, I'm
Those are my students, but we don't see them. Like, they're all on Zoom.
No, only Carly is on Zoom.
Only Carly. Maybe. Carly, good to see you. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Concordia University's Force Space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Readings for Hope and Agency, a book discussion, part of the Hope and Agency in Uncertain Times conference happening this week here at Force Space. And to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube Live from Force Space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Force Space, we work with our university community to mobilize knowledge, daily activities that examine research questions across the university. We're running this event today as a live streamed Zoom meeting. We welcome comments and questions there via the chat. Those of you in the space, we'd welcome your comments and questions also. Just let us know by raising a hand and we'll get a microphone to you. With that, it's my pleasure to hand it over. Professor in biology, the Jim Grant. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you to Force Space for running this conference with us, keeping us on board. So Doug introduced almost everything, so I have very little to say. This is our third and final event of day one of our 4-day conference. So Rebecca will tell us more about what's going to happen tomorrow and on days to come. I think to introduce this session, a bunch of us were talking a few years ago about students and professors suffering from climate anxiety, future anxiety, feeling hopeless in the world a bit. And so we kept passing books back and forth to read to kind of as an antidote to this feeling. And so then we figured, let's do this as a session and try to share some of our favorite books. And hence we have a panel together. So each presenter will introduce themselves and give a brief pitch on why their book should be read. And so I guess we'll just start with Jordi. Jordi, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jordi, a PhD student at the biology department. And my work really focuses on using eDNA to try to understand how insect communities are becoming more similar due to global changes. And when I got the email from Rebecca about talking about a book, I had to choose Silent Earth by Dave Goulson. Dave Goulson is a researcher in the UK, and his work really focuses on the impacts of pesticides on insect communities. And he's always been very vocal and very passionate about trying to bring awareness to, the general public about the importance of insects for ecosystems. And I have to be, clear that this book, the first half, is very depressing. It's a very depressing book because it's talking about the insect apocalypse, why it's happening, but then it finishes on a very nice note about how things can change. And it actually, on the last chapter, talks about specific things that people can do now to try to see these changes happen for insects, for them to be more in better health in the future. And I chose a quote that's in page 242. I think it's on the screen. It's extremely long, so I'm not going to read it. But basically what he tells us is there's this tipping point that's happening right now because we're having this conversation. And at the end of the day, this book is part of this conversation about getting the word out about, yes, this is a very depressing topic, but we are talking about it. We're not only talking about why pandas are going extinct. Now we're talking also about why grasshoppers are going extinct. And so it's this tipping point that's happening right now. We have to keep it going. We have to have these conversations right now so that then we're able to go over this hurdle and finalize this, being able to move from this climate apocalypse that we have, like that's happening right now, and try to move on to a time where we will not be worrying about, you know, bees going extinct and grasshoppers just disappearing out of the face of the planet. So yeah, I think this book, no, it's not much better than all of them, but it's a book that talks about insects, and none of them, not a lot of them do that. So yeah, I highly recommend it.
Great. Thank you, Jordy. There's time for a quick question? Someone?
About insects, Jordan.
Why do we care about insects? Oh no. Why do we care about insects? Well, insects are extremely important for ecosystems. They are ecosystem regulators. They provide a lot of functions. I mean, we all know about the pollinators. So I don't need to talk about the pollinators. But even for soil health, they're extremely important. Also for just culturally, insects have been extremely important for everyone, like for all different cultures, whereas it's for food, you know, subsistence, just as art. They're extremely important in all these different levels, and they're so abundant, and we know so very little about them that it's extremely important to just know more about these insects.
And so I haven't gotten as far as you have in this book because I find the first so hard to get through. So what solutions does he present? It's a spoiler, I know. Sorry.
No, it's not really a spoiler, but maybe one of the I mean, he proposes a lot of things, but one of the that I never thought of was limiting the use of flea treatments on dogs and cats, because these flea treatments have these pesticides that are usually banned in agriculture, but then when it rains, this even if it's a very small amount, there's millions of dogs all around. And so they all end up in the water systems, and they have been found to now be affecting insect communities. So just very simple things like this, just limiting the flea treatments, just finding alternative solutions that are not involving these banned pesticides, for example.
Great. Thank you, Jordy. Okay, Juliet, take it away. Introduce yourself and then your book.
Hi, everyone. I'm Juliet. I'm an undergraduate student here at Concordia in environmental science, and I've always been really interested about like the intersection of natural sciences, more specifically climate science, and more the social science. And this book, The Ministry for the Future, I find really encapsulates this intersection and my personal interests. So this book by Kim Stanley Robinson is a science fiction novel, but is really based on fact and real science, and explains and describes the plausible outcomes of the near future. The story mostly revolves around this thing called the Ministry for the Future, which is an international organization that is dedicated to addressing all the issues that come with climate change. And throughout the book, there's many different themes that are explored, but a lot of them are based on the various solutions to climate change, with an emphasis in this book mostly on geoengineering, but there's also economic, political, and social solutions that are explored as well. And the book really delves into like the moral, ethical, political dimensions of these solutions, and really prompts the reader to consider their opinion on these solutions. The author very clearly says, like, this is up to the reader to interpret, which I found very interesting. But the main solution kind of proposed by the author is that the importance of systemic change. And this emphasis I find really causes, at least it caused me, to rethink my like societal values and rethink how different alternative approaches to governance, economics, and resource management can impact how the climate evolves. As you can see, it's not very a light read. It's quite long, and it's also not a light read mentally. It's quite heavy in. It's a difficult subject, climate change, but I think it really caused me to really engage intellectually and question and build upon my current views and my current knowledge. And even with this difficult subject, it did give me hope. Even with like the very intense storyline and the intense methods that were used to cause change throughout the book, it showed me that you do have to believe in humanity in its the fundamental goodness of humanity. Because if not, without hope, there's nothing really. So this is a quote I really enjoyed in the book, and it's as follows: "We will keep going because there is no such thing as fate, because we never really come to an end." This is how the book ends. I like it because it kind of leaves this open-ended question and kind of makes you think that despite any uncertainties, you have to be determined and resilient, and a new equilibrium can be created. So I highly recommend this book. It was educational while still being entertaining, with the science fiction aspect that allowed more leeway to explore the plausible solutions. And if you're interested in exploring the intersection of science fiction, environmental issues, and societal dynamics, all while maintaining hope, read The Ministry for the Future.
Thank you, Juliet. That was great. Time for a question from the audience or the panel? Quick question. I've got one, Julia.
Yeah.
So it is a big, potentially heavy book. Is this a book you read in a week, or do you keep it on your bedside table and read, a chapter a week? How did you read it?
I had to read it a bit quickly, because I got it recently. But for me, it wasn't a before bed book. It wasn't a very oh, I feel so great right now, let me just fall asleep. It was like a sit down, read a big chunk of it, and kind of let myself think about it. It wasn't the end was hopeful, and your own conclusions made it hopeful, but it was a very heavy, it's not a before bed read for me, at least.
That's because you're younger than I am. Okay. Thank you, Juliet. Next up is Jochen.
Thank you, Jim. I am a teacher and researcher here at Concordia University. I have been here for more than 15 years. And the topics we work on include landscape fragmentation by roads and landscape connectivity for wildlife and urban sprawl and environmental impact assessment. And the book I would like to present to you has a story behind it, because very often you have seen interviews probably at some extreme climate event where the journalist would ask a scientist, so was this big flooding or this big storm caused by climate change? And then the scientists usually reply, well, climate is an average over 30 years, but we cannot tell if a single event was caused by climate warming. All that we can say that these extreme events are getting more frequent with more warming. So, but this was the past. This is over now. Now it's possible to do this attribution of single events to climate change and distinguish that from other extreme events that were not caused by climate change. And that's very exciting, because this is the question we really want to know about and would like the scientists to answer. So a friend of mine told me about this new book when it came out in summer 2019 in Germany. So we bought it and we read it. And here it is. It's called Wütendes Wetter. Oh, you're too fast with the slides. There's one before. Yes, this is the one. So when you translate that, wüten means raging. So it's raging weather, like the raging grannies, right? That you all know. And the subtitle is Auf der Suche nach den Schuldigen für Hitzewellen, Hochwasser und Stürme, which in English is Searching for the Culprits for Heat Waves, Floods, and Storms. So what new science are they referring to here? And this is called attribution science. So that means attributing extreme weather events to climate change if it has actually been caused by climate change. So that means we can tell the likelihood of extreme events to occur under current climate change conditions and what this likelihood would have been without climate change. And that's where this attribution comes into it. And with this evidence, scientific evidence that we then have, we will now be able to sue fossil fuel companies such as ExxonMobil for the damages that their products are causing and that they have been denying for so long. ExxonMobil has had scientists working in their company that showed all these climate damages conclusively. And to the outside, ExxonMobil has manufactured doubt very actively, even though they know that this was false. So now the scientists are after them, and this really gave them big hope. It's the only hopeful book that I know, except for Ministry of the Future, maybe. The book follows the story of Hurricane Harvey in 2017, which flooded Houston very much, so you probably remember. And the amount of rainfall that Harvey brought was 3 times more likely to occur because of climate change than without climate change, with some uncertainty around it. So it's somewhere between 2 times more likely and 4 times more likely, but potentially up to 10 times more likely. So there's always an uncertainty around that, but much more likely than without climate change. And then the book proceeds day by day, telling the story about Harvey and the events surrounding it, while it goes into various directions to explain what's behind it and how it works with weather and climate, how they're related. For example, there's simply more energy in the system now, which can create these events more frequently. So of course, I like this book a lot, and I thought I want to share this with my students, and I was wondering how I can do that because most of them don't speak German. And they wouldn't learn German just for one book. And then 1 year later, I finally found out that a translation came out in 2020. So that's the time for the slide, exactly. And they translated it a little differently, like angry weather had heat waves, floods, storms, and the new science of climate change. So here it is. And I also wanted to ask if attribution science is mentioned in the book Ministry for the Future. I know Kim Stanley Robertson pulled together many, many suggestions, but is attribution science in the book? When I read it, but I didn't read the whole thing, I did not remember seeing it. So that would be an important piece missing if it's not in there.
I don't think they mentioned it from what I remember. The main thing, like solution, was a lot of geoengineering. So like they talked about putting like emissions into to cool down like a volcano. So for heat waves, for glacier melt, they thought about like pumping out, pumping the water out from under it so they don't calve as much. And then there's also a lot of eco-terrorism.
So that means even
anyways.
once you have read the Ministry for the Future, you still want to read Angry Weather,
Yes.
because that's an additional solution. Yes, thank you.
Does anyone but me have a question? I have a question. No. Jochen, how accessible is this book?
Oh,
the
that's
average
very,
person?
very accessible. It's like an adventure story that you read and you can't stop reading. Like we read this and had to put the book down at some point to do other things as well, but it reads easily within a week or less because it's so exciting.
Has there been a court case yet using this methodology?
There have been court cases, but I haven't followed up since if based on the attribution science, they have done this. But she mentions court cases like, for example, from a farmer from South America suing a German energy company, RWE, which is trying to cut forests to dig for more coal in Germany. So there was a whole documentary about that as well 2 weeks ago here at Concordia. But I really think this is one very, very promising way to go with court cases.
Great, fantastic, Jochen. This will go back this way. Oh, you have a question?
Sorry, we did ask each of our panelists today to submit a quote.
Oh, the
quotation
yes,
from the
it's on
book.
the next
So-
page. Sorry.
And
yes,
Jochen
yes, yes.
submitted a very long one, so we have to get to it. And let us know why.
Yes, so
why
we
you chose
find
this.
ourselves on the threshold of a new age of extreme weather. The good news is that we can still do something about it. Every time we vote, pick an electricity provider, make financial investments, choose a mode of transport, set the menu for our next family get-together, we decide just how angry the weather will get. The court case of Loyola versus RWE AG shows that even a Peruvian farmer no longer has to stand by and watch, powerless, as climate injustice reigns. Attribution transforms climate injustice from a theory calculated in models into a real-world concept. Elinor Ostrom, the economist, believed that such transformations happen when groups with little access to power become aware of the power they do have and the actions they can take, and express these through social movements, strikes, and protest marches, by voting, or even through lawsuits. There's plenty we can do to make countries and companies accept and tackle the challenges of climate change. Every single one of us can help decide whether global warming increases by 2 degrees, 3 degrees, or 4 degrees Celsius. This is both an opportunity and a responsibility. And I think that gave me a lot of hope that this is actually true and can be done.
Great. Thank you, Jochen. Strikes and lawsuits. Concordia.
Well, yeah.
Next up is Alex. Alex, please introduce yourself and tell us about your book.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Patry. I'm a PhD student in the Geography, Planning, and Environment department. I study past climate and past environmental change using tree rings. And today I'll be talking about How to Be a Climate Optimist, Blueprints for a Better World by Chris Turner. So this was published in 2022, pretty recent. And Chris Turner is a journalist, a Canadian journalist who for the past 20 years has been covering the renewable energy transition. And so this book is really framed from that lens of how energy is changing and how it's very technology, policy related. And it paints a really good picture, and it shows that we sort of have to change our narrative about the climate crisis, because a lot of positive things have happened, a lot of progress has been made. And so he goes all around the world and gives different examples of, as he would write articles about the energy transition, how he slowly became more and more optimistic. He started off quite pessimistic because all the projections were pretty dire. Things were not looking great. Progress wasn't really moving. This is in the early 2000s. And then slowly things started picking up. And by 2020, he was sort of blown away. He's like, we live in a different world, in a world that seemed like sci-fi just 20 years ago. And he gives a few concrete examples of that, especially the projections that the International Energy Agency has made. So originally in, I think it's 2005, the International Energy Agency projected by 2020, we would have, I think they said 70 gigawatts of solar energy. And when Chris first started doing journalism in renewable energy, we had 5 gigawatts of solar energy. The projection a few years later was that we would have 70 by 2020. In 2020, we had 700. So that's a huge difference and showed how even the projections were quite pessimistic and things accelerated to such an extent. And actually, I checked up the values for 2023, and we're at over 1,400. So we've doubled it in the past 4 years and are way above the projections. And he also shows that he gives also another international agency prediction, which was that by 2030, we'd be at 40%. We'd have a bit over 40% of above baseline greenhouse gas emissions. So I believe that's in around 1990, what were our global greenhouse gas emissions. And they projected that by 2030, we'd be at like 46% or we'd be 46% above those baseline emissions. But now the projection is 24. So we're only going to be 24% above the 1990 levels, when we used to think we would be at 46%. So he just gives a lot of these examples, and he goes to actual places like an island in Denmark where they pioneered smart grids and using electric vehicles and having a completely renewable energy community, and shows how much progress they made and how it brought vitality to that community and economic growth. And he really shows that we need to really shift, make a new sort of narrative around climate change and the solutions to climate change that will inspire people instead of instilling fear in them, because that's how change is made more quickly, and that people need to sort of imagine a better world, and that it's very easy to now, because there's all the technology is there and things are happening and there's big changes on the horizon, and that even just economically, renewable energy is really, it's already starting to completely outcompete fossil fuels. So we don't even need, not that we don't need to push for it anymore, but it's happening whether they like it or not. Renewable energy is taking over, and it's going to be like the cheapest form of energy by 2030 for the vast majority of the world. And we're hitting all these thresholds faster than we thought we would. And so it's really such a great book. I mean, it's definitely from a more, like it's for a mainstream audience. Like I think anybody can read it. I am super not well versed, but I've read a lot about these issues and the solutions, and I found it super interesting and a lot of interesting facts, and made me very hopeful. And honestly, I feel like it helped me pull myself out of my pandemic depression, because I read it about a year and a half ago. And yeah, and it was just super interesting. I guess the only criticism I would have is that it's doesn't really touch on climate justice as much as I would like it to, but he's really trying to show to general audience, like, having a more renewable and sustainable future is a great thing, and that we need to show that give a new value proposition, he calls it. So show that it'll be a better life. And he points to like electric vehicles as an example of Tesla. They made electric vehicles just better than the alternative. And say what you want about electric vehicles, like car culture. He mentions, he always gives the caveats that I was looking for of, yeah, car culture has to be reduced, but he's also saying, like, just by the statistics, even a place that has the highest density like Japan, it's only around 30% of the population that doesn't have a car. So we still have to keep all these things in mind. It's a very realist approach, very based on facts and stats. So it was really interesting in that way. And I guess I'll just finish off with the quote, which I'll read out because it's not too long, and it's a good gist. So when I say I'm a climate optimist, I mean that in the face of the existential challenge of climate change, I believe the world will develop and implement better systems and technologies to meet our daily needs and reduce our global greenhouse gas emissions to somewhere very near zero in this century. It likely won't happen in time to halt the permanent alteration of many of the planet's ecosystems and prevent significant dislocation and suffering for millions of people, but it will occur with enough speed and thoroughness to leave a foundation for civilization durable enough for future generations to build their dreams on. And that's about the same as any generation's ever done for the ones to come. And so, yeah, he shows that you need to obviously be aware that the climate crisis is a pretty horrible thing, but that the idea of the RCP 8.5, which is like the scenario, the modeled scenario that like of catastrophic climate change, that's very, very, very unlikely to happen, that we are past that. And our narrative is sort of stuck on that. And there was all these headlines about that worst case situation where we reach 5 degrees Celsius. And he's hedging his bets that we will only go slightly over 2 degrees, which still causes a lot of negative impacts, but that it's not the end of civilization, and that we will come out of this with a more beautiful world, a more interconnected world, where we're all collectively living in a life that's more sustainable, and that new generations will be able to build their hopes and future on. So super inspirational, highly recommend. And you could get it, I got it actually by chance, just walking through the Argo bookstore, which is just down the street. So I also recommend to check out Argo bookstore.
Thank you, Alex. Question, comment?
I always have questions. So I read the Geographies of Hope, which is Chris Turner's, I guess, the 2014 version of this book, where he travels the world looking for climate solutions and looking for communities that goes to the island in Denmark, for example. And I'm wondering if this book is all about technological solutions, or if there's, your criticism was about social justice issues. Are there political solutions and social solutions and nature-based solutions discussed as well, or is it really the technology?
Yeah, that's definitely a weakness of the book, because I think he sticks to what he knows best, which is fair. And it's a relatively short book. It's around 250 pages, and the print is pretty big. So he does focus mostly on policy related to technology and renewable energy. Talks a lot about buildings and urban density too, and changing cities. And that's sort of the extent he explores, and he acknowledges it too. He says that adding the climate justice aspect to it makes it a much more difficult issue to discuss, and that the solutions are much more complicated, and that when we bring it to that conversation, it becomes about these long, like ever long issues with humanity of poverty and famine and and all these other things. And obviously it's important, but he also sort of suggests that the technology in itself, like solar panels, for example, automatically are less are just empower communities, and so that solves issues in itself. And he doesn't dismiss necessarily all the intersectional issues related to climate change. He just focuses on what he knows best.
Great, thank you.
Just because I haven't read the book, and I'm wondering, how does Christina walk this very narrow line of like saying all this, that like, yes, change is gonna happen, like we're gonna think people are gonna suffer, but at the end of the day, like we'll be able to like solve the issue, and like saying this, but then avoiding people being like, oh, things are great, like just start burning plastic again because things are just gonna go great. So like might as well just keep things like they are now.
Yeah, well, he really paints the future as the renewable energy future as inevitable. So I think the way he frames it is really that these changes are going to happen. Like, of course, that people will still be burning coal, but even coal, it's being phased out much more quickly than people expected. And so yeah, there's this whole argument in general about climate optimism and hope and how to frame it without putting your head in the sand. And I think he toes that line very well. And he really demonstrates that you could be optimistic while also aware of all the things that could go wrong. And that generally the narrative of a scorched earth is what we have to replace. Of course, there's audiences where maybe that's still more effective, but for a general audience, we need to really make this new value proposition, which he compares to the post-war period of suburbia was really just sort of sold, especially in North America, but all around the world as like a solution. And it really, it connected with people. It's like, oh, this idyllic landscape and you have your own property and that, but that has to change. And he said, we need to provide an alternative value proposition of like, okay, this cities, now everybody's moving back into cities, and cities are way more efficient and cause way less pollution. And so yeah, he definitely toes the line well, and you could, I highly recommend you read it, and you'll see that.
Great, thanks, Alex. Rebecca, over to you.
I guess I'm next. Thank you. I'll get my slide going here. So I wasn't initially going to be part of this panel, but I couldn't let it go without discussing Braiding Sweetgrass, which many of you have read, hopefully, and anybody who has had me as a professor has heard about this book. My name's Rebecca Titler. I have been organizing this conference, so if you're here, you've heard from me. I teach here at Concordia. I teach in the geography department, but mostly at the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability. I'm an ecologist by training. I also am the coordinator for the Loyola Sustainability Research Centre. We run this conference every year with the goal of starting conversations and fostering conversations across disciplines. My students have all heard about braiding sweetgrass and had to read some of it if they haven't already. It's actually, we didn't plan this, but it's a good follow-up to your book, Alex, because braiding sweetgrass to me is about values, and that's why it speaks to me. As an academic advisor at the college where we teach about sustainability, we have high levels of climate anxiety, high levels of eco-anxiety. It is, a week does not go by where a student is not in my office asking me how I get up in the morning, knowing everything that I know. So this book panel is, crucial, and it's crucial that we be able to support our students to empower them and support each other to empower ourselves, because if we are desperate, then we can just hide our heads in the sand and not get anywhere. So I have books on my shelf, and I give many of these books to students to say, here's some hope for reading. Braiding Sweetgrass is one of those books. I have no idea where my personal copy is, because I have lent it to somebody. So this is Jochen Jaeger's personal copy of Braiding Sweetgrass. Recently, the comes in a couple of different editions, so I have them up here. The one on the far right of the screen is for young adults, so there's a slightly younger audience for this one, so it is accessible to everyone. My child's teacher in elementary school has brought them this book, the young adult version. Robin Weld-Kimmerer is a Potawatomi citizen. She lives in New York State, and she's also a botanist. She teaches botany there. And for me, she speaks to me. She speaks to the reason I became an ecologist, which is because of a fascination for life on Earth. She also provides the Indigenous perspectives, which we tend to we have to be very careful of the noble savage ideas that Indigenous peoples just know how to manage the earth. But we do know that Indigenous peoples are 5% of the global population and responsible for the vast majority of biodiversity on Earth. So we need to think about how they've been doing this, how they continue to do this, and we need to learn from Indigenous expertise and Indigenous wisdom here in Canada, especially that we have not managed to destroy through our genocidal policies. So Robin Weld-Kimmerer speaks as an ecologist. She speaks to me, but she also speaks as an Indigenous woman about how these two, how science and Indigenous knowledge can work together, and how we can learn from each other. It's powerfully written from a personal perspective. She's a mother as well, which speaks to me. So we were talking about it before, and someone was saying that they had a hard time reading it. I can't put it down. And when I am feeling, when I'm feeling down, I pick up Robin Weld-Kimmerer, and it's like picking up a friend. I invited her to speak at the conference a couple of years ago. She didn't come because she was coming to Dawson, but I felt like I already knew her, right? Because I'd read so much of her work, and she speaks so personally about her own experience. I should have written down what I was going to say because I could talk forever. There you go. One of the things that I teach my students in class, there's so much of value in this work, but one of the things that I teach is the principles of the honorable harvest. I teach a course in the fall on sustainable forest management. So we start with the honorable harvest. Robin Weld-Kimmerer is a fantastic example also of how to refer to Indigenous knowledge and how to report on it. The honorable harvest is not something that Robin Weld-Kimmerer invented. So she is quoted, as having put it down on paper, but she is fully cognizant and clear that these are principles that she has paraphrased, that she has brought together based on her knowledge of various Indigenous, the practices of various Indigenous peoples today and traditionally across North America. So she says the guidelines for the honorable harvest are not written down until now by Robin Weld-Kimmerer, but we need to remember that Indigenous knowledge is often passed down orally, or it's even consistently spoken of as the whole. They are reinforced, I can't see all of it because, okay, they're reinforced in small acts of daily life, but if you were to listen to them, they might sound something like this. Know the ways of the ones who take care of you so that you may take care of them. Introduce yourself, be accountable as the one who comes asking for life. Ask permission before taking and abide by the answer. Never take the first, never take the last. Take only what you need. Take only that which is given. Never take more than half. Leave some for others. Harvest in a way that minimizes harm. Use it respectfully. Never waste what you've taken, and share. Give thanks for what you've been given. Give a gift in reciprocity for what you have taken. Sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. So I teach biodiversity and I teach sustainable forest management. I teach about what the earth gives to us in terms of life. And some of these can sound, you know, are you going to stand in the forest and thank the tree before you cut it down? She does talk about how these are applicable. You might stand in the forest and thank the tree before you cut it down, but you might also just use these principles to think a little bit more, to be more deliberate, for us to be more deliberate in terms of how we use the resources that the earth gives us. I'm not a religious person, perhaps a spiritual person, but all of this speaks to me as a way to consider our relationship with the non-human beings of the earth, and to be more deliberate in how we manage the resources that we have. So there's very much to this book, very much that I can't talk about, would love to talk about, but if there's, I'm going to do Canada Reads. If you read one book, read this one. Read it before bed. You can read it before bed. It's fantastic. I'm done. Any questions? Yeah, Julia.
Do you think the concept of the honorable harvest could be applied to how we include traditional ecological knowledge in more mainstream policy? The kind of the way to like respect it, to ask permission before taking. Do you think that can be applied to more knowledge-based resources?
Yeah, she does talk about that and give specific examples of when it may or may not be particularly applicable. But I think her approach is that if we have these as values, then we're less likely to just think of the world as, you know, providing things for free, as owing us, you know, even the oxygen that we breathe for free. And so the one that catches me is never take more than half, right? Because that's a 50% goal, right? And do we really take that 50% goal? But the idea of thinking about what we're harvesting relative to, you know, the entire population, that is certainly valuable. And Jim can tell you about this in terms of fish harvests, for example. It's certainly more than valuable in terms of setting management and stewardship goals. Yeah. Anyone else? I have something in the chat, but I don't know. The audiobook is also lovely, read by the author. Thank you, Carly. Done.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, it's a fantastic book. In fact, Rebecca and Carly put me onto it, and I would have done this book, except Rebecca wanted to, and she does it much better than me. So anyhow, okay. I guess I should do our last. My book is called Humankind, A Hopeful History by Rutger Bregman. This is a slightly different book than the other, but it's very general. It's about humanity in general. So who should read this book? Well, if you watch the news a lot, first of all, you shouldn't, because people watch the news or tend to be depressed. It's because you watch the news, you can quickly convince yourself that humans are evil, because war in Ukraine, what's going on in the Middle East, Donald Trump running for president yet again. I mean, if that doesn't depress you. And so this book can really change your life. I mean, Jochen, he used to be a miserable fellow and he read this book, and look at him now. But anyhow, so the book, maybe I should show the quote. Really, the purpose of this book is very simple. It's, what's his radical idea? That most people deep down are pretty decent, and that is it. But it's incredibly important because the solutions that we're talking about do need the technology, but they need collaborative thinking and collective action. Elinor Ostrom. And so that will only happen if we are cooperative. And so really the point of the book is to really shatter this myth. It's called the veneer theory of civilization, that human civilization is a thin veneer of morality and civility. And if you break that veneer because of a hurricane or a war, we'll all turn into, you know, aggressive, selfish animals, essentially. And so what he does, he simply just, that is just not the case. and he presents data to show that. If you like the data, he analyzed, people collect data on world tragedies, hurricanes, etc. If you follow the news accounts, they'll usually show people suffering, and then they'll say, oh, and there's a looter over there, and there was some crime over there. And then they go off to the next big thing they have to cover. But if you stick around, what happens is in almost all those cases, yes, there is some looting, but for the most part, people are cooperative, genial, sharing, and that's how people get through these events. And so it's this misread of the world that we have by watching the news a lot. And also he then takes on a couple of iconic kind of experiments in human history. The one is an experiment. It's a book called, you probably were forced to read it, Lord of the Flies. Anybody read that in high school? We should probably take it out of our curriculum because, first of all, if you haven't read it, a bunch of English schoolboys get marooned on an island, and within 2 weeks, they're kind of killing each other and acting like animals. The veneer theory of civilization. And of course, it's fiction, total fiction. And the only case that happened like it, there is a real case of Lord of the Flies. And of course, the boys were marooned and took care of each other. And so I think we should just ditch this book. It just gives you a false idea of humanity. And I guess the other example, the Stanford prison experiment. You may have, if you've taken psychology, it's arguably the most famous experiment in psychology. And you know what? It wasn't an experiment. What it purports to say is you dress some students up as prisoners and dress another bunch up as the prison guards. And very soon the prison guards are torturing the students as the prisoners, and things just fall apart. They lose the thin veneer of civility that they had as students. And of course, it's a complete fraud. He coached them to do this. He misrepresented all the results. And so if you read the journals, in fact, the students were caring about each other. And so, but these ideas that we are kind of evil underneath are just empirically wrong. And he gives you all sorts of evidence. So if you're feeling down at all about humanity, and I often do, Donald Trump actually gets me feeling that way a lot, read this book, and I guarantee you'll feel better about yourself and about, your community, Montreal, Quebec, Canada, the world. So I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot. And I agree with that part. At the end, I wonder, isn't he a bit too optimistic with his suggestions that humanities will save the planet? And I was thinking, isn't he taking it a bit too far in the end?
I think the key message is that fundamentally, we are decent. And so I'm a pragmatist, a real pragmatist. And if you look at game theory solutions to common good games, etc., he's got a little section in here about all these games. He's put all the games together. And these games assume that humans are rational, I wouldn't say selfish, but interested in in ourselves first. And what all these studies universally show is humans outperform the predictions, meaning we are kinder, we're more cooperative than a game theory model would predict. And game theory models work really well for animals, but are poor for humans because we are too kind. And so I think maybe he doesn't deny Hitler, and we have all the examples of evil in the world. We know them all. But I think what it says is it's that kindness and the reciprocity that is built into our human nature that will let us actually use the technology in collaborative ways to solve it. I think that's the most important thing, that we will cooperate when given the chance. So.
I have something in the chat, just a second. Let me see. Sorry.
It's from Carly, and it's just a reference to the real story of the Lord of the Flies that Dr. Grant mentioned. So there's a link to a Guardian article there if you're interested in following along with the real version of Lord of the Flies.
Thanks, Carly. It's great. It's a great reading. So I assign it in class now because, students do tend to get depressed. It's a tricky one, right? But Anyhow, so I guess now we're going to open it up. Questions from the audience, questions from online analysts about any books, comments in general.
If you're in the space and you'd like to ask a question, just raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. For those of you online, just feel free to place your question in the chat.
Thank you. Well, I would like to say something about Professor Grant's selection. Lord of the Flies was, I think, a kind of a metaphor for imperialism and what it does to the world. And the idea you quoted from Humankind, it's the same idea as Marshall Rosenberg puts forth in Nonviolent Communication, that that humans are basically decent. And one of the things he said was that to do his work, he had to learn to love Hitler. We probably can't all do that, but yeah, the nonviolent communication and believing in the good of humanity is powerful.
Yeah, I'm not certainly an English scholar, but when I took high school English, we learned Lord of the Flies as the veneer. We become, it's called, the British would actually say go native. They went native on that island. And first of all, that's that's the time when Lord of the Flies was written. But yeah, I mean, I think it is a metaphor for all sorts, but it's often used as a metaphor for things go wrong and our morality goes wrong. But yeah, excellent point. Other questions, comments from anyone?
I'm just gonna add, and I think like in talking about nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg, and I think it's also very important to remember that he always put like there was the jackals and the giraffes, and so like there was like this type of people that were always more like gloomy and you always want to strive to be a giraffe. And I think that one of his points was like you can like even if you're a jackal, you can always be a giraffe. So I think it's very important, like even if you've read, all these terrible books. I haven't read The Lord of the Flies. It's not one that in Spain you have to read. We have to read the Quixote, which is much worse, probably. But you can always do the flip. And like always people are like, oh no, like, I'm too old. I've seen too much. I don't want to put the effort. You can always flip to seeing humanity as kinder, I think.
The one cool thing is though that Bregman will ask people a question, or people he quotes to. He'll give them two scenarios. A plane crashes. Do people all cooperate and carefully leave the plane in orderly fashion, letting children and elderly go first, or do they just rush out selfishly, pushing each other like we kind of saw in the Titanic movie? And most people will say it'll be the selfish pushing version, but almost every example is the former, even on the Titanic. And so, we do have this general thought that we're and I'm a Darwinian, and I believe we do have self-interest, but we also, part of our self-interest is our relationships. And so, yeah, I don't know.
We have a question in the back here.
I'm interested of the book made in Germany. Is it any language in Germany can we buy or get here in Canada?
Which book?
Oh,
The German book, yeah. Go ahead. You got that.
The book is certainly available in English. Maybe other languages has translated as well.
Only English, no, not German language.
Yes, it was originally written in German.
You
Yeah.
can get here.
Yes, you can get it here. Yes, in English.
Looking for the German version, but here in Canada. That's what that question. She's wondering if she can get the German version
Oh, yeah,
here
sure.
in Canada.
You can get any version here in Canada. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. The answer is yes.
Thank you.
Emma has a question.
Well, I was just going to build on that idea. Human nature being, aggressive or not. And this has been studied by Alison Gopnik, who's a developmental psychologist, who's shown that with the youngest babies you can test, they're like everybody else. They're torn between being selfish and wanting to help. They show both of those desires. And so which one gets strengthened has to do with the environment in which they grow up. And so I think the implication for us is it's kind of like the game theory. If people are surrounded by an environment where people collaborate, they're more likely to collaborate. If they're taught that everybody else is your enemy and is out to get you, then, they'll respond aggressively.
That's a great comment. So how come that we all think people are so unkind or aggressive? Who's spreading the false news?
I think media is sensationalist because, that's what sells. My now 12-year-old loves to watch the CBC, listen to the CBC on the radio, and I have to turn it off on the hour for the news because we cover the sensations, right? We cover I don't know why.
Something that Chris Turner actually says quite a few times is that doom is easy. And I think that applies to what we're talking about, in that it's so much easier to focus on the negative things and on what's bad is happening, and it gets the eyeballs as well. So just the incentive structures of journalism and media get more eyeballs, it's better. And so I think that's a big issue related to it, but also, and I've found it in myself too, as I've tried to speak about the climate crisis, it's so much easier to talk about the bad things and talk about the doom. And it's a lot harder to find the good things, both because of journalism or because of the media's coverage of things. But also it's just, I think it's not hardwired in us, but it's just part of, it's a laziness almost. It's like, it's harder to see things in a positive way. And people tend, and I've seen it myself as well, I just tend to be like, okay, things are horrible, I give up. And countering that is a huge hurdle, but it's also totally possible. And I think these books show that there's so much fuel for a positive outlook. It's just, you have to look a bit harder.
We have a question/comment relating to this online from Carly. They say, as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about climate change, as a teacher, as a researcher, as an outdoors enthusiast, etc., I find that often when I sit down to read something in my free time, I turn to fiction or to something lighter, more escapist. I buy all of these books you're talking about with the intention of reading them, and then they just sit on my nightstand unless I'm looking for material for a course. So I'm curious if any of the panelists have similar feelings about being resistant to consuming more climate change content as leader.
I can start. Since I've got the mic. Thank you, Carly. I love you, Carly. Yes, the Ministry for the Future is sitting on my nightstand right now, and I'm having a hard time. Juliet's told me when it gets easier, so I may skip forward to page 377 where it gets easier. Absolutely. I mean, especially when you work this stuff day in, day out, right? I always say that students are my biggest inspiration and provide me with the most hope. And sometimes that is because they push me to find it, admittedly. But yeah, some of this is easier to read than others. And that's why I chose Birding Sweetgrass, because I never found it hard to read.
I do not have that experience, Carly. I really was reading forward and forward with Humankind when Jim mentioned that for the first time. When we discovered Wütendes Wetter, we couldn't stop reading. And now I picked up a new book, The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, and it's thick, but I love it. I already bought the sequel, which is The Matter with Things, and this comes in 2 volumes. It's 1,500 pages, and I cannot wait for the summer to have the time to read these books because I think they make such a big difference. And it's such a different story of what we hear at university and in scientist circles most of the time, right? Where we hear about reductionist approaches and fragment everything and publish as quickly as you can, anything you couldn't publish, which I think is not going to find us the solutions we need. We need more integrative, more holistic approaches, and they are related to what indigenous peoples have been doing for thousands of years. And we should finally sit down and learn from them rather than publish as quickly as possible and look at outcomes and success all the time. I think the system that is set up for pushing these economic ideas all the time is wrong and will not succeed. And that's why I'm so eager in anything that offers a valuable alternative. And those books exist, like those here on the table and others.
I'm on the, I mean, because this book I left for a year that this book I started reading in 2022 and I left it because it was too depressing until I came to the last part, which was actually like what brings it to a better place. And there was a similar book that I had the similar experience, Collapse by Jared Diamond. Extremely heavy book, super long. It took me 6 months to read it. And I think the way for me to just get through these books is just to think about it think about them in a different way. This book, for example, yes, it talks about the insect apocalypse and how insects are just disappearing because of pesticides. But then I started thinking about it more in the ways of it's actually getting the conversation started. And so I just, instead of having my academic hat on and like just thinking of ways of how, how he's testing this and how things are just going wrong, I was just thinking more about it of like, oh, this is just, we're just having a very nice conversation about it. And so it was rather more of, you have to just take your cap off of just trying to be too scientific about it and just like, okay, we're just having a conversation about this. And in this case, it turns out that it's about insects going bye-bye. But in that case, it's about how humans are great. And so that's how I get through all these books usually. And do I regret having left, this book took me 1.5 years to read. Do I regret that decision of leaving it on a shelf? No, not really. Because in that meantime, I read a lot of other books that were actually very nice. So sometimes just give it a rest, give the book a rest and things will look better in the future.
So thank you for that question, Carly. You can see her there on the screen, panelists. And we have another participant on Zoom, PK. I believe you ask a question. Go turn your mic on.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I don't feel like writing today. So thank you so much. I'm glad I could attend this meeting. The book sounds really interesting. I just want to comment that I believe humans are both good and bad, depending on the situation. Or, I mean, people can change. The brain is plastic and so on. So I never really bother with that. But one thing I do encourage is that you read these books outdoors or in a quiet place or a place where people are happy. Say, for me, I do all my reading on the canal because most people are with their dogs or there you see the best of humankind. If you watch but I also believe that humans will war forever, which is a nasty thing. So we've warred all through history. So I think the balance is that there's enough people in this world, like the panel and those people here, who are just willing to move through difficult reads and find a way, either personally, in their groups, in their teaching, in their communities, to do better. And the one thing I really recommend is you read a book, you put it down, and you go look for insects in your garden. Go look at them, go see how amazing our animals are. Or Joachim's work is looking at animals on the highway or solutions to living with our urban creatures, such as crows, coyotes, and so on. So I love that there's so many solutions by so many creative people, but also science people. So anyway, it's just to say thank you for this. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, PK.
How are we doing, Rebecca? Over time. Well, maybe any final questions, comments from the panel? You'd like to comment about the insects, Jordy? Oh, there we go. Go ahead.
So I find that when I read books and I go over them again, I read them a couple of times, I get different meanings each time I read it. I wanted to know if that applied to any of the books you read.
I'll jump in about braiding sweetgrass, which Carly and Rebecca put me on to. It's a book that it's very deep and lyrical. So you read it the first time, you kind of get the plot, but you miss the magic, I think. And so it's a book I think you have to, I kind of read the whole thing, but it's kind of nice if it's on your night table, you just read a short section. You go, oh, I missed that. Because she's a pretty magical writer. So I agree.
I think it also depends on the mood or the mindset you're in while you're reading the book, and that can vary on each time you read the book. For me, I've read this once, but I think if I go through it again, which would take a long time, but if I go through it again, you can really see, yeah, like the different details in each read. You can see different things, but yeah, I think it's important to certain books to like, from another perspective, explore them. I think that's important as well.
I also agree. I have that with scientific papers as well. Every time I read them, I discover so much more. So yes, that's completely normal. And that means valuable books and articles. It's totally worth reading them twice or 3 times.
And talking about them, because I've chatted about braiding sweetgrass with Rebecca, Carly, others, and they'll tell me, oh, you missed that in chapter whatever. My favorite chapter is a different one than Rebecca's. And so it's good to talk to others about your favorite book, because we miss so much, I think.
But also one of the speakers this morning spoke about climate anxiety in 3 minutes, so it was very quick, but she did a fantastic job, Aspen, the Climate Emergency Committee. And she talked about the importance of building community. And I think discussion around books is a way to build community, right? It's a way to meet people who have similar values and have deep conversations about the meanings of what you're reading. So yeah, I agree, Jim.
That sounds like a pretty good message to end on, Rebecca. So thank you all for those book recommendations. And thank you to the audience. Rebecca, do you want to say a bit about, Rebecca will say a bit about the exciting things coming tomorrow. But if anybody wants to come up after and look at these books, please do. And I'm willing to loan mine out to anyone who would like it. But so, and Jochen he'll loan out the German one, but no, the English one, but not the German. Okay, what's coming up tomorrow? Rebecca will tell us soon. Yep. That's okay.
While we're waiting, Jordy, you might be interested in Menno Schulzhausen. Oh.
It's PK again.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, do you know Menno Schulzhausen? He's an evolution biologist studying specifically in insects and small creatures and how they adapt in their DNA to changing climate.
So maybe I've read, but the name does not ring a bell. Would you be able to type it in the chat?
It's in the chat.
Jordi Meno. Huh. No, it does not ring a bell. Meno. Okay, yeah, no. I'll look them up for sure because I do work with DNA. So
Jordy, he wrote a book called what's it called? Darwin Comes to Town on urban evolution. And if you want a copy, I have one in my office. I can lend it to you.
and then I'll just steal it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Have
Carly.
you read it?
I read parts of it, but not the whole thing. It's on my nightstand with all the other ones.
All right, with that, I've got my other slideshow up. So thank you all for today. It was a fantastic day. We had a great attendance in person this morning as well. It's fantastic to see everyone online too. We hope that you'll come back tomorrow. We have almost a whole week of events coming up. Let me just get my slideshow working here. So this was today's panel, but we have events here in Space tomorrow and Wednesday, and then on Friday we'll be at Loyola. All of the Space events are online as well. So if you want to join as you did today via Zoom, you can use the same link. It's also in your email if you registered, or you can click on that register for Zoom online if that's how you got here. We'd also be thrilled to see you in person. There will be food, coffee, more food tomorrow, Jochen, so you won't be hungry. We start bright and early with a keynote address by one of our new colleagues, a new faculty member here in chemical and mechanical engineering, Marc-Antoine Goulet, who does quite interdisciplinary work on batteries. So we hope you'll join us for that. And then we have some student presentations, a conglomeration of student presentations from 12 to 1:30. From 2:15 to 3:15, we hear from some colleagues here about at Concordia and at the Research Centre about how digital disruptions are changing our social and environmental systems. And from 3:45 to 5, we'll be talking about a project in which we are collaborating with local community conservation organizations, and they'll be joining us here. Carly will be presenting there as well, and Emma, who's here in the room with us. So we'll be hearing from some of our academics, but also more importantly, or at least as importantly, some of our community collaborators looking at conservation of urban green spaces here in Montreal. On Wednesday, we have another exhibit coming into the space. We have a morning workshop with Juliet, who's here, on climate of hope, which will help us address some hands-on activities to help us address some issues in climate anxiety. 11 to 11:45, Alex is going to be back as part of the climate change panel, and Alex is going to be talking about climate denialism, right? So that came up this morning. We're looking forward to that. Jochen, you're going to be back in the afternoon on Wednesday. You have to remember. On transdisciplinarity and agency, we'll have Professor Katja Neves here as well to discuss what we mean by transdisciplinarity, which is a lot of what we try to do here at the Research Centre. It's very challenging, so we'll talk about some of the challenges. And then we have the sustainability ambassadors coming in the afternoon to talk about bats. Should be a fantastic workshop. And at 4 o'clock, we have another new colleague, Professor Mitchell McLarnon, who's in education here, a new Research Centre member who will come and talk about his adventures in urban gardening here, I imagine on campus as well as elsewhere. And then Thursday, we don't have anything during the day. The Climate Emergency Committee is celebrating their 5th anniversary. So if you want to register for that, you can go to the webpage. To the conference webpage and register for that. They'll be meeting at the Frigo Vert here downtown, so you cannot come on Zoom to the party. You also cannot come on Zoom on Friday to the RF. We are meeting only in person, so the parties are happening in person. I encourage you to join us. We have a fantastic roster on Friday as well. There will be more food and lunch. Do register if you're planning on coming so we know how much food we need. But hoping to see you there. And with that, I will thank all of our partners. So the Space is always fabulous to collaborate with. They provide us with this space for no extra cost, and it's a fantastic space, and all of the technical support and organizational support and patience and kindness with which they help us to organize all of this is absolutely indispensable. We also have, we're largely hosted by the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability and the Loyola Sustainability Research Centre. But we also have funding from the Office of Research here at Concordia, the School of Community and Public Affairs and First People Studies, and the Science College, as well as the Departments of Biology, Communication Studies, Geography, Planning, Environment, and Political Science. So we are very grateful for all of the funding and support from our partners here at Concordia. And with that, I will invite you to come back tomorrow, and thank you for coming today. Tomorrow, again, you can join us in the space, or you're welcome to join online as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening. The sun is still out thanks to daylight savings, whatever hour I lost of my life yesterday. So do enjoy the sun and the snow, and we hope to see you tomorrow.
Okay, everyone on Zoom, thank you also for joining us there. We're going to be closing up that Zoom and the live stream also. Just a reminder that remains online on our YouTube channel, CU4 Space. And I expect I'll see all of you again tomorrow, I hope.